quote, oops, okay. Their preamble begins, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. So the inherent dignity of each person is the fundamental Jewish teaching. Two of the greatest rabbis of the Talmud, who were close friends, Rabbi Akiva, one of them said, the greatest teaching is love your neighbor as yourself. Yahavta recha kamocha. But his close friend, Rabbi Shimon ben Azai, said, nope, I don't agree with you. The most important teaching in the Torah is contained in Genesis, where it says, on the day God made human beings, they were made b'tselem Elohim, in the likeness of God. So Ben Azai's argument to Akiva was, every human being is created in God's image. Some are easier to love and some are harder to love. I've encountered those. Some days you can love them and some days you can't, but still you have to recognize and treat everyone as created in the image of God. Love is too shaky a pedestal to base the entire Torah on. We base it on the inherent dignity of every human being. So Ben Azai's argument is in many ways the one has prevailed. And his principle leaves no exception. It goes back to creation, that each one of us is created in the image of God. So that human dignity is the universal message which is at the core of Judaism, and that is the bedrock of human rights. So Power, as an anti-racist organization, is dedicated to achieving justice for everyone in Pennsylvania. And when we surveyed the election that recently passed, when we were looking to that over the summer, we saw the rise of white Christian nationalism as a direct threat to human rights, as a direct threat to all of us here in Pennsylvania. Given that one of the candidates had very close ties to white Christian nationalism, we felt that we had to act, and we know that this is a very purple state, and in fact, Pennsylvania has the second highest number per capita of people arrested for January 6th, and has, I believe, the first or second most number of people in Christian militias in the United States. So we have a serious white Christian nationalist problem in this state, which we don't often see here in Philadelphia, but if you go to the center of the state, you see it very quickly. So Power is both a 501c3 and a 501c4 organization. We have a sister organization, so we can engage in some partisan politics at a low level. So we felt that we could go on this bus tour. Primarily, we had 5 goals on this bus tour, which is one, to create a new narrative about faith and democracy in Pennsylvania. We do not want to cede the moral ground or the religious ground to white Christian nationalists. Second, to inspire people to vote their values in the election. Third was to explain the threats of white Christian nationalism to our community safety and to democracy. 4, to expose the folks who really the financial supporters of white Christian nationalism in the state. And 5th, to show that Power is a spiritual and political home for people in Pennsylvania seeking justice. Our trip started here in Philadelphia, where we spent the first week in Philadelphia and then in some of the surrounding suburbs. And in Philadelphia, we focused a lot on getting out the vote, and many people in Mishkan, were 70, I think people, Sean said, helped us do that. Mishkan had a very powerful get out the vote group that participated in many activities throughout the summer. culminating in the last week or two before the election. Our second goal was to really inspire people to go out and vote. And at an interfaith service here in North Philadelphia, one of our leaders, Reverend Mark Tyler, was addressing the question of why bother to get out to vote. In a lot of parts of Philadelphia, people are saying, why bother to vote? It doesn't make sense. And he asked the question, if our vote wasn't so valuable, why are so many people trying to repress it? The fact that there are so many people trying to take away the vote, to stop us from voting, to change the voting laws, that must mean your vote is valuable, and you need to go use it. The third goal was, of course, to expose the dangers of white Christian nationalism. And in community organizing, we talk a lot about self-interest. What is motivating me to do something? Why am I interested in doing it? And I was thinking about why I wanted to go on this bus tour for 3 weeks. Well, part for my motive is, my parents were both Holocaust survivors. So I see the dangers of what white Christian nationalism can lead to. And also, I was in Charlottesville in August of 2017, and I witnessed neo-Nazis carrying torches, and I heard them chanting, "Jews will not replace us." And the next morning, I was out in the streets with neo-Nazis screaming at our faces, and was sadly out when Heather Heyer was deliberately run down and killed by neo-Nazis in the street there, and we had to do street chaplaincy right away. And the tour also coincided with the dates of the Tree of Life massacre, the largest killing of Jews in the United States. Tarso Luis Ramos, who is the executive director of Political Research Associates and a leading expert on the right wing in the United States, wrote, "For most avowed white supremacists, the Jews are the heart of the problem. If you are a racist and believe that black people are less intelligent and even subhuman, how do you account for black brilliance? If you believe black people were happier as slaves or under Jim Crow, how do you explain slave rebellions, the civil rights movements, or the movement for black lives? Avowed white supremacists blame Jews and Jewish meddlings for all of these things: patronage, education, organizing for black achievement. They believe behind every black intellectual or organizer or celebrity, the white supremacist sees a Jew pulling the strings. According to white nationalists, no Jews could ever be white because whiteness includes Christianity." So on a policy level, white Christian nationalists and their allies are trying to destroy public education in America, control women's bodies, tell us who we can love, dictate our gender roles, and privatize all government services. So we felt we had to educate people about what they are trying to do. We spoke with local Christian clergy and laity in Bucks County, in Pittsburgh, Gettysburg, York, Reading, Birdsboro, Lancaster, Harrisburg, about the dangers of white Christian nationalism. In some places, this was the first public conversation people had ever had about white Christian nationalism. While we were on the road, a survey was released that only 5% of the US public knows what white Christian nationalism is. One evening, we were in Birdsboro, which is a suburb of Reading, or small town outside of Reading, and I was sitting at a table. A local organizer and clergy person had organized an evening. There were about 25 or 30 local people there with some clergy, and those of us on the bus were spread out around the room at tables speaking to local folks. And at one point in the evening, we were just having table conversations, asking people, what has been the effect of white Christian nationalism on your life, or how have you seen it? And a gentleman at our table said that he had founded a men's prayer circle, prayer breakfast for once a week, and it had been meeting for several years, and it was an important part of his life, and that a little while ago, one of the people in the group started talking about the election being stolen. And this man felt like, this is my space. This is a space for reflection, for God. Why is this person doing this? And he didn't know how to stand up. He didn't know how to talk about it. So it was just going on. So we had a discussion at the table with him, and we gave him some suggestions. We coached him on how he could claim his space and what it was, and how he could respond to the fellow who was talking about the stolen election and how this wasn't the space for it. So those are some of the kinds of conversations we had, and we repeated that in different places. We had conversations with local clergy. I mean, one of our goals was to talk to moderate Christian clergy to help give them the strength to stand up and oppose it, because so many feel intimidated. So many feel they can't. So part of it was giving them the chizuk, giving them the strength to have those kinds of conversations with people. And at that same meeting in Birdsboro, one woman stood up and said she was on the local school board, and then for the last few months, a group of people were coming and they're disrupting the meeting and saying really horribly transphobic things, and she wanted support. And because of that meeting, at the next school board meeting, I followed up with the local clergy. Half a dozen people went with her, and they began asserting their space. So those are the kinds of things that we think are important, and that's why we in part undertook this trip, to really help people respond to white Christian nationalism. And a fourth goal was to really expose who some of the funders are to one of these things. And it turns out that the wealthiest person in Pennsylvania is a guy named Jeffrey Yass. Unfortunately, he's Jewish. And he lives here in Bryn Mawr. And we had a vigil outside his home. He's worth, reports are maybe as much as $30 billion. And he is the largest funder in the state attempting to privatize education. He's the single largest donor to a whole right-wing dark money infrastructure, to which he gives tens of millions of dollars a year. And he funds elections through a network of PACs and lobbying groups that influence legislation, mostly on privatizing public schools, but also on cutting corporate taxes, busting unions, cutting social safety nets, campaigning against critical race theory being taught in schools, and blocking climate solutions. So it's important to know who these people are and what they're doing. And so we had a vigil outside of his house the first week, and the very last thing we did in Harrisburg was have a demonstration of well over 100 people outside of the Commonwealth Foundation, which is across from the State House in Harrisburg. That is where his network of right-wing groups is housed, and is the headquarters of them. So it's important to name these folks. And our fifth goal was to invite people across the state to choose power as their spiritual and political home. And we created new opportunities. I think as a result of this trip, we may end up with power groups in York, or Reading, or Harrisburg. Now, all of those three are on our radar, and we're meeting with clergy, and those are all new possibilities for us. And in some of the places we went, new congregations are joining power as a result. Of course, we really expanded our social media outreach. We had 40 radio stories about us, and 7 television stories about us, and many stories in the online press. We partnered with a lot of new organizations across the state that we hadn't partnered with before. But from an organizing perspective, what was really important to us is that we involved so many new leaders in planning this. We had over 70 people planning the different things that happened around the state. Worked with clergy we had never worked before, and set maybe the groundwork for a new statewide clergy network. So we were able to show that power is the spiritual and political home for people of faith around the state who are looking to create a more just place. We were able to raise our prophetic voice in the public square. And finally, there's a story that goes that people like to tell that Pennsylvania is Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Kentucky in between that were Pennsatucky. And that's a racist narrative. And we want to interrupt that narrative. And part of our goal was to interrupt that. When we were in Washington County, which is 20 miles from West Virginia below Pittsburgh, we met with the Center for Coalfield Justice and some of their folks who, very, very rural area. And they shared stories, we shared stories that we learned from them about the lobbying, the fossil fuel industry are the largest lobbyists in Harrisburg. There are more lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry than there are legislators in Harrisburg. There's more than one per legislator. So we learned from them as well, and we really are trying to break down some of the rural, urban, suburban divides in the state, break down the divides across different places in the state. And if we can build new power networks in the central part of the state, like York and Harrisburg and Reading, we will be able to make some significant difference in the state. So we felt that we were successful in what we did, and just a last little anecdote. The amazing thing is we pulled this together in 10 weeks, this entire tour. But we found a bus company, and the bus was very expensive, and we signed a $70,000 contract for the bus. And then when we told them what we wanted to have written on the bus, renewing our faith in democracy on the side, and on the front and the back of the bus, it said, "This bus fights fascism." The bus company reneged on the contract. They refused to have that on their bus, so we had to scramble at the last minute and finally found a black-owned bus company that was happy to have "This bus fights fascism." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Fabulous.
You're getting some shout-outs, Mordechai, from Zoomers as well. I just appreciate your leadership and work on this, and Sharon. And just a quick show of hands, who participated in the Get Out the Vote initiative, here. Wonderful. So a lot of hands on Zoom and in the room as well. Thank you all. We're blessed, as I mentioned before I hit the record button, to be longtime members of Power, and also New Sanctuary Movement, Interfaith Hospitality, of array of places where we can put our spirituality and activism, into play. And it's hard to imagine it without you, Mordechai. And I know, Alana, again, you got a chance to jump on the bus there as well. And the work is ongoing. I mean, that's the thing I kept on lifting up. This isn't the most important election. They all are now. There's no such thing as an unimportant election when it comes to preserving democracy and fighting white supremacy and lifting up anti-racism. So we need to shift that mindset, and the connectivity and building community and relationships is all about that long enduring engagement as opposed to just situational or crisis oriented. So thanks to everybody who's participating widely in that arena. So we're going to lift up these words. I hope you'll speak to Mordechai or others of the team if you want to hear a little bit much. Our old friend Rabbi Bob Glupp and Pamela are giving you a little shout out. Mordechai is acknowledging it. Namasteing you back. And it's appropriate that we put the Torah back in with these additional words now and say Aleinu, and it's up to each of us in our own way. I know some folks have to scoot, and other people with kids needed to leave, so we'll close our service together. And there is a light kiddush outside, and for some of us, we'll be staying to dedicate new Yortzeit plaques, which we do every time at this year, and we also have some new Holocaust memorial plaques, which we're going to dedicate at the end of January during the Shoah Torah service. So that's all coming up now. So shall we put the Torah back? Okay. Please rise. Or sit up straight if you're at home. No slouching, Bob. I see you. And then all people will be gentle.
And then all people will be strong, and then all will be so very safe and free, and then we will be
Called Eden
Eden
once
once again.
Ha-ho, 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 Ushema.
Warner's Cottage is on page 450. If you're observing a yard site or in mourning, you can put their name in the chat or just say them where you are.